Welcome to Serial Stories, the podcast where we unravel the most chilling, fascinating, and downright unbelievable true crime tales. Each episode, we explore a theme that ties together the darkest corners of human history, where lives intersect with violence, intrigue, and the unthinkable. Join us as we step into a world where truth is stranger than fiction, and every tale leaves you wondering, what drives someone to cross the line into the unimaginable? Solved by luck. The murder of Hele Crafts. On a freezing November night in 1986, the small, peaceful town of Newton, Connecticut became the site of one of the most infamous murder cases in American history. Hele Crafts, a 39-year-old flight attendant and mother of three, vanished under mysterious circumstances. As the days stretched into weeks, her absence became more than just suspicious. Investigators pieced together a horrifying puzzle that led them to an unimaginable conclusion. Hele's life had ended brutally, and her remains had been destroyed in a rented wood chipper, a chilling crime that would forever change how forensics solved murder cases. Hele Crafts seemed to have it all. Working for Pan Am Airlines, she juggled a busy but fulfilling career while raising her children with her husband, Richard Crafts. Richard was a respected airline pilot and part-time police officer. However, behind the idyllic facade, their marriage had been deteriorating for years. Hele had discovered Richard's infidelity and was gathering evidence to confront him. Friends later recounted that Hele had grown increasingly wary of her husband, confiding in them that if anything happened to her, Richard would be to blame. On November 18, 1986, Hele returned home after completing a long flight from Frankfurt, Germany. She was tired but eager to reunite with her children. That evening, a violent snowstorm blanketed the area, making travel nearly impossible. It would be the last time anyone saw Hele Crafts alive. The next day, Hele was nowhere to be found. Richard told her friends and family that she had taken a trip to Denmark, but something didn't sit right. Her car was still parked at the house, and her airline colleagues had not received any notice of her absence. As days turned into weeks, Hele's friends became frantic and pushed the police to investigate her disappearance. Initially, police were skeptical. Hele was an adult who could have left of her own free will, and Richard maintained that she had chosen to do just that. However, the deeper they looked, the more troubling the circumstances appeared. A private investigator hired by Hele before her disappearance came forward with evidence of Richard's affair and Hele's concerns about her safety. Suspicion soon turned to Richard, but investigators lacked concrete evidence until they received an unexpected tip. A local snowplow driver reported seeing Richard near Lake Zor during the snowstorm with a U-Haul trailer and a wood chipper. The oddity of someone operating heavy equipment during a blizzard raised his suspicions. Acting on this lead, investigators scoured the banks of the Housatonic River near the lake. What they found was horrifying. Tiny bone fragments, human hair, bits of tissue, and a single fingernail embedded in the icy ground. Detectives traced the wood chipper back to Richard, who had rented it just days before Hele's disappearance. Through meticulous forensic work, experts examined the fragments, using techniques that were groundbreaking at the time. They matched the remains of Hele through the dental records and identified traces of blood in the couple's bedroom and on the wood chipper itself. The evidence painted a grim picture. After murdering Hele, most likely in their home, Richard had dismembered her body, fed the parts through the wood chipper, and scattered the remains along the riverbank in an attempt to destroy all traces of her. This case was monumental because it lacked a traditional body. Prosecutors had to rely on circumstantial evidence and the innovative forensic techniques used to identify the remains. It was one of the first cases in U.S. history to result in a conviction without a full body being recovered. In January 1987, Richard Crafts was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. His trial was highly publicized, with the grisly details shocking the nation. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, but the prosecution countered with the overwhelming forensic proof. Jurors were shown photographs of the wood chipper and the tiny fragments of Hele's remains, a haunting visual that stayed with them throughout the trial. The first trial ended in a hung jury, but Richard was convicted in a retrial in 1989 and sentenced to 50 years in prison. The case became a landmark in forensic science, demonstrating how the most calculated attempts to cover up a murder could be unraveled by technology and perseverance. Richard Kraft served most of his sentence, but was released on parole in January 2020 due to good behavior and time served. At 82 years old, he lives a quiet life, though he remains an infamous figure in true crime lore. The murder of L.A. Crafts continues to be cited in criminal justice as a prime example of how science and determination can solve even the most gruesome and methodically planned crimes. The Green Bicycle Murder of Bella Wright. On a misty evening in July 1919, the serene countryside of Little Stretton, England, was shattered by a gruesome discovery. Bella Wright, a 21-year-old factory worker, was found dead on a quiet country road, her bicycle lying beside her. The only clue to her murder was an enigmatic stranger that she had been seen riding with earlier that day, on a distinctive green bicycle. What began as a baffling whodunit would unravel into a case solved through one of history's earliest forensic breakthroughs. Bella Wright was a vibrant young woman, well-liked in her village. She worked in a local rubber factory and often visited her uncle, who lived several miles away in Galby. On July 5, 1919, Bella set off on her bicycle to see him, just as she had many times before. When she arrived, she mentioned meeting a man along the way, a stranger riding a green bicycle. Though her uncle felt uneasy about the encounter, Bella dismissed his concerns. After her visit, she set off to return home, accompanied by the same man on the green bicycle. The following morning, a farm worker stumbled upon Bella's lifeless body along the quiet road. Her bicycle was tipped over nearby, and a pool of blood stained the ground. A single gunshot wound pierced her head, and her bright blue eyes, described as her most striking feature, stared lifelessly into the sky. The murder stunned the community, leaving them to wonder, who was the man on the green bicycle, and why would he harm Bella? At first, there was little to go on. Bella's family insisted that she had no enemies and no romantic entanglements that might explain such a violent end. The local constable interviewed witnesses who confirmed seeing Bella riding with the man that evening. Descriptions of the man varied slightly, but the green bicycle was the common thread in every account. Despite the search for the man and the bike, the investigation stalled. Weeks turned into months, and the mysterious rider seemed to have vanished. For many, the case appeared destined to become another unsolved tragedy. That is until February 1920, when a green bicycle was dredged up from River Soar in Leicester. The bicycle, though rusted and battered from its time underwater, held crucial evidence. Its serial number had been partially filed away, but police were able to trace it to a manufacturer. The owner was identified as Ronald Light, a 34-year-old school teacher with a quiet, unassuming demeanor. Light initially denied any involvement, but inconsistencies in his statements soon unraveled his defense. During their search of his belongings, police found that Light had a history of suspicious behavior. He had been dismissed from his teaching job for inappropriate conduct, and had previously been accused of arson. Witnesses also testified to seeing him near the river on the night the bicycle was discarded. Further damning evidence emerged when a revolver was discovered among his possessions, though it was missing bullets. Ballistics testing, a relatively new forensic technique at the time, linked the bullet that killed Bella to Light's firearm. While this evidence was circumstantial, the emerging narrative placed him at the center of the crime. Authorities charged Ronald Light with Bella Wright's murder, setting the stage for a dramatic trial. In June of 1920, Ronald Light stood trial at Leicester Assizes. The prosecution painted him as a calculating murderer, citing his efforts to hide the bicycle and his contradictory statements about the events of the night. However, Light's defense took a surprising turn. He admitted to being the man on the green bicycle, but claimed he had nothing to do with Bella's death. According to him, they had parted ways shortly before she was killed. He panicked upon hearing of her murder, he said, and decided to dispose of the bicycle to avoid suspicion. The jury deliberated for several hours before delivering a shocking verdict. Not guilty. Ronald Light walked free, his testimony having cast just enough doubt on the prosecution's case. To this day, many believe he was guilty but skillfully avoided conviction. The murder of Bella Wright remains officially unsolved, though most historians and crime enthusiasts consider Ronald Light the likely killer. After the trial, he disappeared from public life, and little is known about his later years. Bella's story, however, continued to intrigue true crime aficionados as one of the earliest cases to rely on forensic evidence. The cyanide Coca-Cola case of Stella Nickel. In 1986, a quiet Seattle suburb was rocked by a series of mysterious deaths linked to tampered Excedrin bottles. But what at first appeared to be a random act of terror turned out to be something far more sinister. Stella Nickel, a seemingly ordinary wife and mother, had concocted a horrifying scheme to kill her husband and covered her tracks by poisoning random strangers. Her motive? A hefty life insurance payout. Her undoing? An overlooked piece of evidence and her own daughter's damning testimony. Stella Nickel lived in Auburn, Washington, with her husband Bruce. On the surface, they were an unremarkable couple navigating the ups and downs of suburban life. But Stella's discontent had been simmering for years. Financial woes and a stagnant marriage weighed heavily on her. When Bruce took out a $100,000 life insurance policy with an additional payout for accidental death, Stella saw an opportunity to escape her troubles. On June 5, 1986, Bruce came home complaining of a headache. Stella handed him 2 capsules of extra-strength Excedrin, a common over-the-counter pain reliever. Minutes later, he collapsed, gasping for air. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Bruce was pronounced dead. His cause of death was ruled as emphysema complications, and no further investigation was conducted. But for Stella, Bruce's death was just the beginning of her twisted plan. After Bruce's death, Stella learned that the insurance payout would not be processed until his death was classified as an accident. Desperate to cover her tracks, she devised a chilling strategy to implicate the Excedrin capsules in his death. Stella laced additional bottles of Excedrin with cyanide and placed them on store shelves, intending to create a public health scare that would mask her crime. Her plan worked at first. On June 11th, the day after Bruce's death, 40-year-old Susan Snow, a bank manager, died after taking a dose of Excedrin for her headache. Her death puzzled doctors until an autopsy revealed traces of cyanide. Investigators quickly linked her death to the tempered Excedrin capsules. Another man who had also taken Excedrin narrowly survived. As panic gripped the Seattle area, stores pulled Excedrin from the shelves, and the FBI launched a massive investigation into the poisoning. The breakthrough came when investigators analyzed the bottles and capsules. They found cyanide traces in the Excedrin bottles Stella had tampered with. However, the randomness of the poisonings made the investigation challenging. It wasn't until Stella herself came forward, claiming that she had found a tainted bottle in her home, that investigators began to see cracks in her story. Suspicious of her timing, the FBI examined the bottle Stella provided and noticed something peculiar. The lot number on her bottle did not match any of the other tainted bottles found in stores. This suggested that Stella's bottle had been planted as part of a cover-up. The case broke wide open when Stella's daughter, Cynthia Hamilton, approached authorities with damning information. Cynthia revealed that her mother had expressed frustration over Bruce's life insurance policy and had openly researched poison methods. She also recalled Stella using library books about cyanide, further implicating her. On December 1987, Stella Nickel was arrested and charged with product tampering resulting in death. The trial was a media sensation, with prosecutors detailing her cold-blooded plot and use of forensics evidence to link the cyanide-laced capsules to Stella's home. The defense argued that there was no direct proof Stella had tampered with the Excedrin bottles, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. In 1988, Stella was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 90 years in prison. She became the first person in the U.S. convicted under the federal anti-tampering laws enacted after the Tylenol poisonings of 1982. Stella Nickel remains incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institute in Dublin, California. She continues to maintain her innocence, claiming she was framed. Her case is often cited in discussions about consumer safety and the evolution of forensic science. For the families of Bruce Nickel and Susan Snow, Stella's conviction brought a measure of justice, but her horrific actions left scars that could never truly heal. The drowning death of Bobby St. Stinnett, revealed by a baby's cry. In the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, a nightmare unfolded on December 16, 2004. Bobby Jo Stinnett, an 8 months pregnant 23-year-old, was found strangled in her own home. The crime scene told a story of unspeakable violence, but it was the absence of something that alarmed investigators most: Bobby Jo's unborn baby. A nationwide manhunt ensued, and the horrifying truth came to light through a miraculous discovery: a newborn baby's cry in the home of the killer. Bobby Jo Stinnett was known for her sweet disposition and passion for raising rat terriers, which she bred and sold through online forums. She lived a quiet and happy life with her husband Zeb, and was eagerly awaiting the arrival of their first child, a baby girl they planned to name Victoria. On December 16th, Bobby Jo's mother arrived at her daughter's house to find a scene of chaos and horror. Bobby Jo lay on the floor, her hair matted with blood and bruises around her neck. Her belly, which had been full with the life just hours earlier, was disturbingly deflated. The baby had been cut from her womb. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Bobby Jo had been corresponding with an online acquaintance named Darlene Fisher, a prospective buyer interested in purchasing one of her puppies. In truth, Darlene was a fabricated persona created by Lisa Montgomery, a woman with a dark history of deception. Montgomery, 36, had long been struggling with mental health issues and had lied to friends and family about being pregnant. Desperate to maintain her falsehood, she devised a plan to steal Bobby Jo's unborn baby. On the day of the murder, Montgomery arrived at Bobby Jo's home under the pretense of buying a puppy. After chatting briefly, Montgomery attacked Bobby Jo, using a rope to strangle her into unconsciousness. With grim determination, she used a kitchen knife to perform a crude cesarean section, removing the baby from Bobby Jo's womb. Montgomery then fled with the newborn, leaving Bobby Jo to die alone on the floor. The gruesome nature of the crime stunned the community and law enforcement alike. The FBI quickly joined the investigation, launching a frantic search for the missing baby. Witnesses reported seeing a dirty red car near Bobby Jo's home, which became a crucial lead. Meanwhile, Montgomery returned home to Melvin, Kansas, with the newborn, passing her off as her own child. She even called her husband, Kevin, to announce the baby's arrival. Friends and family came to visit the supposed new mother, unaware of the horrific crime she had committed. The case broke wide open when investigators tracked Montgomery's online activity. They discovered the fabricated Darlene Fisher account and matched Montgomery's car to the vehicle described by witnesses. On December 17th, just one day after the murder, agents arrived at Montgomery's home and heard an unmistakable sound: the cry of a newborn baby. Inside Montgomery's home, agents found the baby alive and unharmed. She was immediately reunited with her father, Zeb, who named her Victoria Jo, as he and Bobby Jo had planned. Montgomery was arrested on the spot and charged with federal kidnapping, resulting in death. The trial began in 2007 and revolved around Montgomery's mental state. Her defense argued that she suffered from severe mental illness, including pseudocyesis, a psychological condition that causes women to falsely believe they are pregnant. The prosecution countered with evidence of premeditation, including Montgomery's online research on cesarean sections and her attempts to fake a pregnancy for months. After hearing the chilling details of the murder and kidnapping, the jury convicted Lisa Montgomery and sentenced her to death. Victoria Jo, now a young adult, grew up in the care of her father, surrounded by love and support. Lisa Montgomery spent years on death row at the Federal Medical Center, Carswell, in Texas. On January 13, 2021, she became the first woman in nearly 70 years to be executed by the U.S. federal government. Bobby Jo's tragic death left a permanent scar on her family and the town of Skidmore. But her legacy lives on through her daughter, Victoria, whose miraculous survival brought light to an otherwise unimaginable darkness. The Suitcase Killer, Melanie McGuire. In April of 2004, a fisherman near Virginia's Chesapeake Bay made a gruesome discovery. A suitcase washed ashore containing dismembered human remains. 2 more suitcases appeared the following days, revealing the full extent of a horrifying crime. The victim, William McGuire, was a seemingly ordinary husband and father from New Jersey. The trail of evidence eventually led to his wife, Melanie McGuire, whose calculated actions earned her the infamous nickname, the Suitcase Killer. William and Melanie McGuire were a seemingly successful couple living in Woodbridge, New Jersey. William worked as a computer programmer, while Melanie was a respected fertility clinic nurse. They had 2 young sons and were in the process of buying a new home, a step that seemed to be a signal for a bright future. However, beneath the surface, their marriage was fraught with tension. Melanie later claimed that William was controlling and abusive, though friends and colleagues described her as ambitious and outwardly happy. On April 28, 2004, William was last seen alive. According to Melanie, he stormed out of their home after an argument and never returned. When days passed without word from him, she claimed that he had disappeared voluntarily. But William's absence raised suspicions, and soon the discovery of the suitcase unraveled a far darker truth. The first suitcase, found on May 5th, contained William's severed legs. Days later, a second suitcase appeared with his torso, and the third contained his head and arms. All 3 were expertly packed, the body parts wrapped in trash bags. Investigators identified William through fingerprints, and their attention quickly turned to Melanie, who had not reported her husband missing. Police uncovered a series of damning clues. Surveillance footage from a local home improvement store showed Melanie purchasing items later linked to the crime, including trash bags and a mattress cover. Detectives also found evidence of a recent cleaning spree in the couple's bedroom, which Melanie claimed was routine. The investigation revealed a chilling timeline. Melanie had drugged William with a potent sedative called chloral hydrate, which she obtained through her medical connections. Once he was incapacitated, she shot him twice in the head and began the gruesome process of dismembering his body. Using surgical skills owned during her nursing career, Melanie dismembered William and placed the remains in 3 suitcases. She then drove nearly 300 miles to Chesapeake Bay, where she dumped the suitcases in the water, likely believing they would sink and never be found. However, poor weather and ocean currents caused the suitcases to float ashore, exposing her crime. Investigators also discovered that Melanie had been having an affair with a colleague, Dr. Bradley Miller, at the time of the murder. Text messages and phone records revealed her growing disdain for William and her desire to be with Miller. Prosecutors argued that the affair, coupled with the financial pressure and the purchases of a new home, motivated Melanie to kill her husband. Melanie McGuire was arrested in June 2005 and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial began in 2007 and drew widespread media attention. The prosecution presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, including her shopping spree for murder supplies, the sedative prescription, and her affair with Dr. Miller. Melanie's defense insisted that she was innocent, painting her as a victim of William's abusive behavior. Her attorneys claimed that the evidence was purely circumstantial and that the police had failed to investigate other suspects. Despite their efforts, the jury found the meticulous planning and execution of the murder too compelling to ignore. In April of 2007, Melanie McGuire was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Melanie McGuire is currently serving her sentence at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in New Jersey. She continues to maintain her innocence and filed multiple appeals, all of which had been denied.